Bueno, pues bienvenidos y bienvenidas a la mesa de racismo.
Welcome, everyone, to this roundtable on racism, gender, and intersectionality. For those of you present here in the regional government offices here in Sevilla, and for those of you following us on streaming, welcome. I'm going to introduce Rosario Naranjo. She is going to be the moderator, and she will be introducing the rest of the speakers. One of our speakers is actually online, as you can see. And there are three more people on the dais. So Rosario, she's a professor in constitutional law at the University of Sevilla. Among her research, she works on fundamental rights, the rights of the migrant population and people with disabilities, and the rights of ethnic minorities. She's published books and papers on these subjects, and she's done research fellowships in Spain and abroad. She's been part of in more than 10 research projects on fundamental and collective rights when they are postponed. And she's led women discrimination sessions, sessions on exclusion and equality and non-discrimination in Congress in the face of new regulatory advancements. Welcome, everyone. We're going to open this roundtable on racism, gender, and intersectionality. So what do we mean when we talk about intersectionality? The interpreter apologizes. The sound was cut off.
Pertenecer a una determinada raza, a una etnia o a una religión. A pesar de los avances en derechos, sobre todo desde los tratados internacionales de derechos humanos, seguimos a día de hoy muy lejos de lograr su consecución, ¿no? Sigue existiendo y ejerciéndose discriminación y violencia desde múltiples ámbitos, ¿no? Desde el poder político, el poder económico, las instituciones, incluso la propia sociedad. Pues bien, es lo que vamos a ver en esta mesa. Vamos a analizar todas estas cuestiones. Nos vamos a acercar al contenido de este término, ¿no? De la interseccionalidad de género. También vamos a analizar la protección que nos brinda el derecho internacional y debatiremos en concreto esa interseccionalidad de género.
In particular,
nos acompañan hoy en la mesa y online.
So these are the subjects we're going to cover today, this roundtable and online. First, we're going to have Maria Filigrana. She's a general health psychologist. She has a master in social sciences and social intervention. She's an ethnic and social mediator with populations at risk of exclusion. She's a specialized in Gypsy population. She's worked for more than 20 years for the Gypsy Associative Movement, and she's vice president of the Association of the Roma population in Andalusia. And she's been coordinating many projects as a social and school mediator to provide care and social psychological support. And she has authored several protocols on the history of the Roma people and education in this field, and she coordinates the protocol for Roma women who suffer gender violence, and she also works on interventions with Roma women, and she's worked on all these projects together with the ministries and the Institute of Women in Spain. Online, we have Mary Elena John. She's a racial justice specialist at UN Women. Her work includes developing an intersectional approach to social justice for the policies at UN Women. And prior to that, she did research and published to publish a novel, Unburnable, and which is now used in colleges, and it covers gender, race, and the resistance to slavery among African American people. She worked for 10 years in participatory development, human rights, and women's rights at the African Development Foundation. She also worked for the International Human Rights Law Group, which then became Global Rights and the Program to Combat Racism at the World Council of Churches. She holds a master's by Columbia University and a bachelor's degree from the City College of New York. And then to my side, Dr. Noha El Haddad Bufar. She's a doctor, family doctor, and she is subspecialized in emergencies and catastrophes. She works as an emergency physician at the hospital in Henares, and she's a Muslim activist with more than 10 years of experience, co-founder of the Association of Muslim Girls in Spain, AKIMI, and she also holds a master's degree in advanced studies on Islam in contemporary Europe, master's from the Complutense University in Madrid. And finally, Dr. Fernando is associate professor of the Department of Social Anthropology and Social Psychology in Political Science School at the University Complutense. He holds a degree, a master's degree in sociology and a master on Islam in contemporary societies. He teaches on gender migrations and human rights, and he's been part of the team of teachers who have taught the cross-cutting subject gender analysis and intercultural studies. He also teaches on gender issues, and he has authored and coordinated many publications on this subject. He researched for the Complutense University and the Agostinho Neto University in the Republic of Angola. And without further ado, we're going to start with the round table. Let me first send out a question to Marie Elena Joan to frame the international protection that the UN offers. Maria Elena, welcome. There's a report by 2022 on contemporary forms of racism. In that report, it mentions how the Agenda 2030 lacks to meet its goal of leaving no one behind, particularly regarding racial equality principles and non-discrimination. So my question is the following. What is your organization, UN Women, doing in the face of, well, how to face this not leaving no one behind in terms of racism and discrimination and other forms of intolerance?
Thank you, Rosario, and good morning, everyone. Greetings from New York, where it is a little earlier here than it is where you are. I'm very, very happy to be here to be able to speak on behalf of my organization on the work that we are doing in this important area around the world. Rosario, to respond to your question, and all protocols observed, the truth is that since its very inception, UN Women has been working around the world very closely with marginalized and racialized women, including women of African descent. However, following the murder of George Floyd in 2020, UN Women took advantage of the renewed anti-racism movement around the world to deepen and potentially, as we move forward, really expand its work with racialized and minoritized women. This began by looking inwards in 2020 to our workplace and our workforce. And for the last 2 years, we have been building out the pathways to a racially just workplace as the first step. At the same time, though, it was recognized that it was necessary to expand this internal focus and to become more intentional in our externally facing programmatic work. In 2022, UN Women created the post of Senior Racial Justice Lead, which I have the honor to occupy, to take this work within the organization forward. While the scope is global, there is a special and strong emphasis on people of African descent, given the decade for people of African descent and recognition of the impact of enslavement and colonization on the entire world. The post has a number of axes or streams. An important one is to support the development and the application of an intentional, intersectional racial justice lens to our programmatic work. In the same way that we are very clear organizationally on what a gender equality lens looks like, we hope to bring the same clarity to understanding the key elements of what an intentional racial justice and anti-racist approach is. We've been largely engaged in exploring and collaborating, centered on discovering what is the state of play, both within and beyond UN Women's work, to inform the structure on which we will develop our long-term roadmap. What we saw is that within UN Women programming, it's very clear there are many good practices already in place to build on. And I'll just give you a couple, or maybe just one small example. In Brazil, we have the human rights of indigenous and quilombola women, a governance matter. This places the most marginalized and socially excluded communities in Brazil at the very heart of state and municipal governance. Through collaboration with UN Women, Quilombola and indigenous women now sit at the table with municipal authorities and influence the environmental policies, socioeconomic development planning, and budgeting that affects them, and they hold the authorities accountable for their human rights. In India, for example, we have our feminist youth leadership, that program that supports young people from across India who are leading transformative social change in civil society. They are from all castes, genders, identities, and abilities. Through intensive residential labs, leadership labs, they unpack caste as one of the central issues of interrogation, and they literally have reimagined the world they know into the world they want. And they're now entering into the second phase of that program. In Eastern Europe, we have extensive partnerships and program work with Roma and other minoritized, racialized women throughout the region. Collaborations address the spectrum from ending violence against women, addressing harmful norms and stereotypes, as well as political empowerment of Romani women. In the Caribbean, we have programs as well. I will continue if we can go further into that if there is interest later. One thing I do want to mention, I discovered in this week and the last week, where CSW, the Commission on the Status of Women, is happening right now in UN Women. And I had a number of small workshop type meetings with members of marginalized, racialized communities around the world. And I discovered that this is one of the key asks of every organization that I spoke with, to provide access to this policy spaces to use their voices to advocate for their priorities. UN Women also recognizes the importance of UN-wide collaboration in the development of our individual agency anti-racism planning. To this end, the area of work I mentioned earlier on what is an intersectional racial justice lens for UN Women or for any organization is being advanced initially in its current initial stages through the UN Network on Racial Discrimination and the Protection of Minorities, or the network. This was established since 2012 and was reinvigorated in 2020 with the goal of strengthening UN coordination, coherence, and joint action in this critical field. It brings together over 20 UN departments, agencies, funds, programs. There, my organization, UN Women, along with UNFPA, UNDP, and WHO in particularly PAHO in the Americas, have taken the lead on a newly created subgroup on people of African descent, which recognizes the special context of enslavement and colonization on current populations and seeks to develop a tailored focus in this area. The network is also in the process of exploring how the UN system can update the older guidances that exist on racial discrimination, given how much has changed in the global context in the past 10 years. The rise of social media with its power to inflame and mobilize hate, the dawn of the age of artificial intelligence, the impending worldwide disruptions brought on by global warming, and profoundly deepening inequalities in and between states, to name only several. All of these global challenges implicate the equality agenda, and with it, the need for action to address racial discrimination and to protect and to strengthen protection of minorities. We are also deepening our intersectional policy analysis as relates to racial justice in our research and data and policy work. A recent example is the policy brief developed within UN Women on racialized, minoritized migrant women and the human rights they are denied through racist migration governance structures. The brief argues that the first step in making migration policies inclusive of all migrants is to address the fact that migration governance around the world continues to perpetuate systemic racism and gender inequalities. And as I mentioned, these workshops that I had over last week and this week, this was another request that came from all of the people I spoke with to jointly amplify their work. They asked that we act as their loudspeaker to use the language of one partner to get their work out in the international policy space using tools that they're not adept at, but which they recognize can advance their priorities. And I would say finally, we have grounded our racial justice initiative firmly around changing harmful social norms and stereotypes, recognizing that they are key drivers of discrimination. And I may speak more on this later. I would finally say that in all these months of exploration with all of these partners, UN Women recognizes clearly that the need for racial justice discourse around our programs must also include...
María Elena, no quiero interrumpir.
Maria Elena, I wouldn't want to interrupt you because we have your remarks are so interesting, but we have so much to discuss. Everything that you're sharing about the work of UN Women is very, very interesting. And I've noted not only the work that you're undertaking, but also a point you made around your work, which is that UN Women works to find the key elements in the anti-racial intersectional approach or lens. And that's exactly what this roundtable seeks to address. Our colleagues, Maria Filigrana and Noah, they are Roma and Muslim women, respectively, and we want to hear from their experience firsthand on racism, gender, and intersectionality, meaning how Roma women and Muslim women are directly affected by this triad, racism, gender, and intersectionality, and how these three aspects have impact on them. Well, first of all, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us in this event. And I would also like to thank the organizers for these very important and unfortunately very much needed sessions still. So building on intersectionality, it's true that intersectionality creates a very useful framework through which we can carry out a deep analysis on the different types of discrimination that have impact on the experience of given people, women in this case. And these types of discrimination come together in certain attitudes or events where they are discriminated against. So this is a useful framework, a useful tool, but I wouldn't say it is an absolute tool that covers all the needs for analysis and to understand these matters. At least I would say this is my experience in the Muslim community. I would like to introduce 3 ideas to explain better how racism, gender, and intersectionality come together. So first, I want to talk about Islamophobia as a specific type of discrimination against Muslim people just because they are Muslim, regardless of where they're coming from. This is a type of discrimination suffered by migrants or long-term residents or people with certain racial features, white people too. And well, just because they verbally express their religion, they can be discriminated against. For many years, there's a type of discrimination that affects women in particular. So it's a double whammy for Muslim women, and it's called gender-based Islamophobia. And the right to education for many Muslim women is jeopardized, especially, for example, when Muslim girls decide to use the veil at a school or high school, even though it is legally, it's legal to do it. There are many girls in Spain who are banned from schools because of the scarf. This is happening in Spain. The right to education of minors is being removed because they're using the scarf. And then there's, well, the right to housing and many others that are being denied to this population. But the worst case for me really is that they're being denied the right to education, and that's why I wanted to mention it. We've been talking about Islamophobia and gender-based Islamophobia for many years. Now, let me move on to another idea that has been introduced a few years back by Zara Fares. It's an acronym between feminist nationalism, and it mentions how nationalist and neoliberal people are exploiting feminist criteria in their campaigns against Islam. And this is driven by the duo Muslim man is chauvinistic, and then the oppressor against the Muslim woman who is vulnerable and the victim, and we need to save her. So on this discourse is built on this tandem, and it conditions a different type of discrimination against Muslim men. In this talk, we're focusing on women, but this new concept is affecting men as well, just because they are men, not only Muslim. And it creates a type of policy, discourse, and alliance. There is a problem too with the native informers. These are people from Muslim communities, Muslim environments, who, based on their personal experience, are feeding the discourse. There is validating that stereotype, the tandem I mentioned, Muslim man and Muslim woman as oppressor and victim respectively. So their experience reinforces the stereotype and reinforces the discrimination too. And the third concept I wanted to bring to the table is this. It might seem a bit odd, but it's just an example of something that has happened recently during the election campaigns. There's a video from 2019, an interview to the Vox candidate, Mr. Abascal in Spain, Vox being the far right-wing party. So when he's asked about feminism and gender violence, his answer goes very much to the point of this. So when he's asked about this, he says, how am I going to be chauvinistic? How am I going to be against women when I'm trying to forbid the teachings of Islam in schools because it's a chauvinistic religion? So he turns it around and he uses this attack. So pointing at Islam as the source of discrimination against women, ignoring the rest of the context, things that have impact on all of our society. He tries to shift the focus towards fighting Islam to hide away from answering his lack of defense for women.
I think very many interesting things are coming up. So, Maria, please. Well, it's very little time we have. It's really a shame. Well, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, and to everyone. And I'd like to tell you how thrilled I am to be here. So even though there are many things that we still need to be fighting for, many things to combat, it's really a pleasure to be here, sitting together with colleagues such as Noah, such as Maria, such as Fernando, and thank you to the Director General for Equal Treatment and Non-Discrimination. Thanks to all the activists and NGOs, CSOs, or partners in this battle. So it's a pleasure to be here. I mean, it's I think the name of this table makes all the sense in the world. Intersectionality, the theory has this theory has given us a place to put on the table all the kinds of discrimination that both that all people of color and Roma population, in my case, are suffering. We discussed this before joining the table, and we spoke with. I was speaking with Noah. And it's funny because the mechanisms of racism work in a very similar ways in different social groups. In our case, as Roma women, we have been enduring racism for many centuries, and also the male chauvinism and all the attacks from the patriarchy. In order to try and speak about this intersectional, this cross-cutting kinds of discrimination, let me give you a definition of racism from the Council of Europe. How racism and male chauvinism work together. So in our case, it's an ideology based on racial superiority and supremacy and institutional racism that's fed by the historical discrimination that is expressed in many different forms, among those violence and dehumanization. Dehumanization is what we, the Roma population, are enduring, and women in particular. There is this supremacy, this idea of the male, white males who are above everybody else, and in this case, white males are not only superior to us because of their being male, but because of that being white. So even though we share many of the different forms of violence and aggression with many other groups, there are certain particularities as well because we are Roma. In our case, well, we have very, very specific kind of attacks. In the case of Roma women, we are discriminated against because we are not only women and Roma, but also poor. This is one of the particular of the distinctive features of Roma population. We are vulnerable, financially vulnerable, and it is quite alarming, the situation of vulnerability in terms of financial stability. In our case, so we are not only being subject to gender-based discrimination and racial discrimination, but also financial and economic discrimination. And we call it anti-Roma gender-based discrimination. When we speak about Burma women, there's something different from other kinds of discrimination. For instance, discrimination against Muslim women is focused around religion. But in our case, it's something as if it was intrinsic to us. I mean, we are discriminated against because the culture we come from and the ethnic or ethnic origins are part of our own DNA, a part of our identity. So many say that for women, for Roma women, to be able to make progress in life, we need to stop being Roma, no actually get separated from our own origins and roots. And so in this case, so we are not only being attacked because of a gender-based discrimination and ethnic discrimination, but because of our own identity. This is a very particular, very specific form of discrimination. Racism has a very clear symbolic dimension. The stereotypes, the images that are used to define us, they speak about in a very dehumanizing way. We are poor, we are we are always submissive. We are mostly, most of the times we are petty criminals. And well, if you take a poll among the general population, you will see this very negative bias where this image of Roma women is always um, uh, the answer. So we always live through this. We are treated as if we were inferior and not skilled enough. And Roma girls, unfortunately, at school, well, they have this. This is very much internalized. They say, "Well, I will never be able to do this or that because I'm a Roma girl because I'm," and so this is why the unemployment rates among Roma girls and among Roma women are very high. The dropout rate in schools and among Roma girls is alarming. The mental and physical health issues among Roma girls and women are very much above the average in that the same in among the general population. So this is just a first approach for you. You have a background. We in of a situation, but to put you in some context. So let me tell you about our situation, so we can you know. Well, I think both Maria Elena, John, and Noah, and you've given us this first glance at your situation, which is so important. There's a very interesting thing that Noah has mentioned. Intersectionality or gender intersectionality. This term actually can be, there's it can be correctly used or not. I know, Fernando, that you're very critical with the current critical framework of intersectionality. Do you think that this analytical framework, this analytical framework of intersectionality, is it still valid? Is it too far too politicized, this intersectionality context? Maybe. Good morning. Can, well, can you hear me? Well, don't worry. If there's no mic, there will be no problem because I'm a teacher. I'm used to speak and to be heard. So thanks to all my colleagues here in this panel. I'm a doctor in gender studies. I think I'm the second male in Spain, the only one of the only two who has this kind of PhD. So there is a very important thing to do to approach this. I mean, we need to do some to go back to our roots. because many of the women I shared my studies with are those who actually created the scientific papers that are the basis of what we are discussing here today. Intersectionality tries to place people in an analytical framework that works in the same way and simultaneously, but can lead to very different outcomes. Let me tell you a story. Anthropology class, social work. One of my brilliant students, she was an honor student. She had top marks, and this. And she was really very successful. And we were speaking about intersectionality, and this young girl from a small town in eastern Spain. We were speaking about race and how it is constructed. Um, and she told me, I'm Roma. I'm the first Roma girl from my community. I come to study this social work, and I'm already 30 years old. So we were working about identity and how it works. But unfortunately, by mid semester, half of her classmates, well, they used to pick up their older belongings, the mobile cell phones, the tablets, everything. And they, as soon as they learned that she was from um, Roma origin, they never let their belongings unattended in the room, scattered around in the classroom. So you can see, I mean, she hadn't said anything about being Roma before, so everybody behaved in a normal way. But as soon as she said this, and she was not, I mean, she was one of the brightest students, if not the brightest in the class, and she was already 30 years old. It took her a long time to be there. So but then by mid-semester, everybody was picking up the stuff and not leaving anything unattended as soon as they knew. And well, luckily and thankfully, she didn't give up, and she continued her studies, and she ended up being one of my brightest students, like I said. And so there are sort of additional kinds of discrimination. There are layers of discrimination. Some of them can be triggered in a certain point in time, and they cannot be triggered at certain points in time. So it's not, we are not always suffering the intersectional discrimination. Of course, it is always race. There's always the racism component, but you need to know how this prejudice works, because it can lead to violence, and it can actually lead to a restriction in the way of life of the victims. So we have already said endless times that race does not exist. It's a mental construct. You look at me, and you wouldn't say that I'm, an Arab of an Arab origin or whatever. And for instance, our colleague from the Roma community, Mrs. Filigrana, she would. I mean, if she doesn't say anything, everybody would think she is just a regular, your regular white woman. So this is a social construct. So the term racialized. The term racialized. I actually hate this term, because everybody here in this room, everybody is racialized. I mean, we were all born in Central Africa, and when mankind scattered across the world, well, some people lost some melanin and became lighter skinned, and so on and so forth. It is a fantasy, it is a mental construct, but it is operational, and this is why it's still alive. It keeps us divided, and it helps the states and the governments to do a number of things. So it's not not only for up to us to deconstruct this, but for us to be very vigilant, very attentive to each of the different elements that come into play in this context. There are thousands and thousands of scientific papers and publications. You are all very much aware of them. So, but what is the future that we want for mankind now that we will be witnessing 40 degrees Celsius in Madrid and almost 50 in Rio de Janeiro, and we are all together facing a much greater danger because of climate change. We have to come together and come and see how to deal with this. So it is up to each and every one of us to see how we operate against racism. And please, 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 no applause, no applause. This is a very deeply emotional moment. And like Ana de Miguel, the philosopher, the feminist philosopher, said, less emotions here, because I'm an emotional person, because we get carried away by emotions. And we need to have the control. So let's bring back reason. Reason topples emotion if we want to win this fight. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Fernando. Very operational fantasy, but an operational fantasy is also a killing machine. I mean, I wish it was only just a mere fantasy and quite an unobtrusive one. Okay, let's move on back to Maria Elena. I don't know whether Maria Elena shares everything that we've been saying here, but what these operational fantasies are excluding us, are killing us. Like Noah and Maria mentioned as well. So, Maria Elena, I'd like to ask you something, because I know that restorative justice is now in a more central position in the fight against racism in the discourse. So how could restorative justice help to achieve sustainable development goals, focused mostly on girls and women?
Maria Elena, your mic is off.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for that, Rosario. I might rephrase it to say that sustainable social and international orders are just not possible without reparatory justice. And we're talking about an approach that is multifaceted. This is critical. Often when we hear about reparations or reparatory justice, it is referencing a really limited approach in that the financial debt is the sole or primary element. And indeed, this is a critical aspect of it, but it is not the only one. And it needs to be holistic and systemic for the SDGs vision of a transformed world to be a reality. In general, the UN system and others in some international spaces are widely endorsing the CARICOM 10-point plan because it is seen to embody such an approach, or at least comes close. It goes well beyond the financial. It includes a much more holistic approach. It includes cultural reparations, educational initiatives, public health, psychological reparations, technology transfer, illiteracy eradication, and debt cancellation. However, as it currently stands, the plan does not specifically speak to the extent to which enslavement and its aftermath has impacted women differently. By that, I'm stating the obvious, but it does need to be stated. The actual perpetration of slavery was through the wombs of women. The effects on Afro-descendant women and girls and men, families of this particular horror, not just the sexual violence, but also the destruction of the family with children as property to be sold, cannot be overstated. Data proves that the lasting effect of this throughout the Latin American Caribbean regions, it's shown through Latin American Caribbean regions' first age of pregnancy, which is the highest in the world, through normalization of a culture of violence against women, through harmful masculinities, through the fact that in the United States, regardless of educational level and financial status, Black women receive inferior health care. This is dramatically evidenced by their mortality rate, which is close to 3 times that of white women. I should say their maternal mortality rate, 3 times that of white women. And notably, although education and not wealth is the key determinant of health, in this case, pregnancy-related mortality rate for Black women with a college education is 1.6 times higher than of white women who have not graduated from high school. So that that really says a lot. I'm happy to note, however, that the CARICOM Reparations Committee is, as I speak, working on an updated 10-point plan. We haven't seen it yet, but we understand that this specific attention to women and girls will be featured in the new plan. It's news that's very welcome by UN Women. With this goal of reparatory justice being global transformation, we also have to look at climate reparations, which really is part and part of reparations for enslavement and colonization. And that is also wrapped up in another type of reparations, which is called the Bridgetown Initiative. It addresses the global financial systems. I definitely don't want to run over time this time, so I will not go into the details of the Bridgetown Initiative. But it's important to say that if all these pieces come together and really take an approach that pays attention to not leaving everyone behind. And I'm saying this on purpose. I know the expression is leave no one behind. We say that a lot in the United Nations. But that really gives the impression there are a few stragglers, just a couple of people behind that we have to make sure are coming along into prosperity and equality with us. But in fact, we're talking about women at 50% of the population. We're talking about people of the global South, former colonized people of the global South, and in the global North as well. So we're really talking about the vast majority of the entire world. So if we make sure that we don't leave everyone behind through these measures, I think if we look at it from this perspective of reparatory justice, we will have a good shot at the vision of a transformed world. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, María Elena. No sé si queréis comentar algo.
Thank you very much, Maria Elena. Do you want to react to her statements, maybe from a medical standpoint? Or maybe I can move on to the next question. So Maria Elena has talked about the need for women to come together in the fight for their rights. I have a question for the two of you here. To what extent do you think social anti-racism and feminist social movements embrace and support your reivindications as Roma and Muslim women, or do you feel you're not represented? And to some extent, as there are As you belong to Roma women and Muslim women associations, could you please talk about the work you carry out in your associations? Maria, would you like to start? So what, as Maria Elena was saying, with this type of broad collaborations and discussions, we share the broad array of situations in the anti-racism movement. I understand a discussion is necessary, and we've been at it for many years, and I understand Noah as well. For many years, we've wanted to put the requests and the asks and the feelings of racialized women, or whatever name we want to give ourselves, Roman women in our case. We've been trying for many years to position our needs and have a loudspeaker, because we need to understand that there are different types of feminism. There's diversity in feminism, and sometimes there is a bit of a struggle in feminism and different points of view that is there, and there are different types of women and different needs. Every day we try to make our voice heard as Roma feminists. We don't want to be saved. We don't want to be invited to speak our truth, but rather across Spain, we have created a movement, not only in our association. The first associations go back to the 1990s. I know it's not very long, but we've made an effort, and we continue to make an effort every day to speak louder and clearer about our needs and our requests and our asks, but we're not always visible. And racism against and discrimination against Roma people makes us invisible. That's their mechanism of choice. Try to pretend nothing is happening, or sometimes the discourse is, well, we're already equal. What are you asking for? So that mechanism has affected us heavily and has mobilized our people the most. It may not be explicit violent discrimination. We have not been banned from any spaces, but the lack of visibility, not being able to have a horizontal dialogue in equal standing is what has hurt us the most. And that's the reason why we are not considered equals, basically. We mentioned it earlier on March 8th. I was talking about this. Roma feminism has been distorted in a way, and that's how I feel. And many of the Roma women feel the way I feel, and I'm sure Noah as well. Our way to reach equality was to become what we're not, because some outer superior being was going to save us from our lives and our culture and the submission to which apparently we are subject to. And this is very odd. Let me actually say something. Within our families, within our people, we are considered to be very submissive. But then when we come to this type of space, everybody thinks we're brave and dangerous. And so there's a bit of a tension there. We're submissive, but feisty at the same time. I guess it has to do with that lack of visibility that they want to extend over us as a blanket. I understand we still need to speak loud and clear and revindicate. We use these broad social discussion events to talk about the struggle for equality. And we want to join this type of conversation. But in our case, I don't think we are at the same level as other type of women. We were not in official documents for the longest time. And we've been able to overcome the reluctance. That was the first barrier. We were excluded women, diverse women. We would be tagged as other communities or ethnic minorities. You would read an official document. It could be, I don't know, any project from the public administration, and it would mention migrant women, Black women, and then ethnic minorities. As we were some weird group. So we really need to own our term and our name, and that in and of itself is progress. We have a couple more minutes, so we're gonna give the floor to Noah to comment on the previous question, and then if you to close the circle, if you could briefly explain the achievements, the reivindications, and the challenges that you're still facing as Muslim and Roma women, that would, help us bring this to a close. So maybe you can close first, Maria, and then we give the floor to Noah. Well, very much in the same line as what I mentioned earlier. Roma women have a challenge to be present, to be sitting at the table in equal terms. I mean, this is a symbolic event, but this is one of our challenges, to have our voice and be part of the discussion. Ideally, the feminist and anti-racist struggle should go in this direction. Another challenge we have is to continue to fight the degrading, dehumanized image of us. This is, and many women will from other communities will share this. It needs to go beyond the cultural stereotype, and we really need to define what is happening. We're talking about poverty, and we don't have to necessarily be defined by that. So dignify the image of Roma women is absolutely key. And as Maria Elena was saying, we need to review the structures, because anti-gypsum is a type of racism, just like institutional racism is. So it's not just a matter of Roma women to carry a struggle to several spaces and be dignified. We want society as a general, starting with the educational system and political measures applied in Europe or in the nation, or also in academia and in mass media. We really need to look inwards and make sure that the structures, the institutions, stop that discourse, because it is not empowering us, it is not dignifying us, actually quite the opposite. We're not victims to be saved. We want things to be horizontal. We want to be speaking in equal terms. There's a lot more to say, but you only give me 2 minutes, so I will leave it at that. Thank you, Maria. Noah? So regarding anti-gypsyism, one of the big problems we have is how normal, how broadly accepted and normalized it is to show a prejudice against the Roma community. They are excluded from the feminist struggle because they've chosen to accept that culture, that identity. So it's on themselves, right? So you either break with everything, or we cannot help you if you are identified as a Roma person. This actually happens with Muslim women as well. And as you were talking about the hegemony of feminism, it's still a minority movement, so it is really not the hegemony, but some people prefer talking about illustrated feminism. what should be the feminist agenda for all women. So once again, it's somebody from the outside putting pressure on us and imposing on a minority what needs to be. So many Muslim women trying to escape from the hegemonic feminism have found refuge in intersectional feminism, because it seems there is more room to discuss. There is more room for diversity. There are different layers, but there is a drawback to this, which is that the feminist struggle or against Islamophobia or gender-based Islamophobia is diluted. And we are now included in this global concept of racialized women, which is a concept, a quite dissonant concept. So we are all in bulk in this racialized women group. Looks very nice during the demonstrations. Racialized women group promoted by feminist associations. But when we share our very real needs, the situation turns uncomfortable. And we've had experience, as we said earlier, Muslim girls are being excluded for wearing the scarf in compulsory education in high schools, in public high schools. We're not talking about private centers or voluntary training, because there might be a bit of a lack of regulation maybe, but we're talking about compulsory education. And when we've gone to political institutions led by our allies to see if something can be done, maybe in terms of information to prevent this situation, so that before the school year starts, we can send a note to schools and remind them the rights that prevail and the rules that cover these students. Now, the answer always revolves around, well, the scarf is a complicated matter. How is it complicated? We're talking about the right to education of girls, minors. And in faraway countries, when the right of education of women is infringed, there are protests, but here in Spain, but when the right of Spanish women is being infringed here in Spain, we look away because it's not part of our struggle. Then there are other political leaders giving voice to well, people who have had negative personal experiences in the Muslim community. And their discourse currently is to exclude Muslim women, either because they see us as victims or accomplices of these chauvinistic men. It's very difficult. Intersectional feminism emerged as an opportunity for further inclusion, but it is being used just on the surface to say, yes, we're very diverse, but our reivindications are being silenced. And then we're not aware. We need to include women. I have the great opportunity to join this type of meeting, and there are still many women, as we've seen in Andalusia, for example, the Moroccan workers who come to work in the fields as farmers. We're talking about the slavery. They suffer all sorts of physical, economic, sexual violence, and we don't speak loud and clear about the situation. And it is our very own problem here in Spain. So we should talk about it, and it should be part of the struggle for women here. We cannot really talk about glass ceilings when we have enslaved women in Andalusia picking the fruits. And then, besides what I mentioned earlier, acknowledging Islamophobia as a specific way of discrimination that cannot be diluted with other types of discriminations, because we can have a lack of awareness. I want to talk about a different problem we have today. As of today, Islam and the Muslim community are seen as foreigners. The Andalusi Institute does a survey on Islam in Spain. There are 2,400,000 Muslim people in Spain. More than 1 million are Spanish. We're not talking about second generation. No, we're talking about Spaniards who were born here and are Spanish through and through, but that's their religion. We continue to identify Islam as something foreign, and that's why it is so hard to understand the struggle and seek equality for the entire population. The same way we need to include other people in this struggle. So earlier in 2023, a national comprehensive plan to implement a European strategy to fight anti-Semitism was approved. The ambassador made mention of it earlier in her remarks. There is increased discrimination against Jews. Now, the last document approved in December regarding equal treatment, Islamophobia, is a side note. There is no comprehensive plan to tackle Islamophobia in Spain. It is not seen as a problem that needs to be addressed. However, it affects 2.4 million people, out of which 1 million are Spaniards, and nobody cares about the problems they are suffering. Well, thank you very much, Noah. This is a very interesting subject. We're talking about Islamophobia as something that affects others. The same thing happens to Afro-descendants and Roma, compared with the white Catholic Spaniard that is the model, and the rest are the others, and the others need to fit in with us. I understand well, that the Roma, Gypsy, and Afro-descendant population agree on this. We're talking about different types of narratives. And at present, we discussed this yesterday too. The attorney mentioned this yesterday, how social media amplify certain political discourses. They're racist, they are negationists in terms of gender-based violence, and they're trickling and having impact in certain sectors of the population. And I would like to give the floor to Fernando to talk about this idea. All of these discourses are not compatible with human rights and democratic states. But this is happening in Spain, Europe, the US, and Latin America as well.
Well, I was listening very carefully to my colleagues, and I'd like to point out a couple of things that both Maria and Noah have mentioned. When we think about ourselves as human beings from the anthropological point of view, well, we think about ourselves in terms of gender. Gender is not something that is only related to women. It also related to men. So let's include males also in these considerations of gender. So then first, do you think that people experience racism in the same way if you come from a different class, from working class, or from from a very wealthy family? Because, for instance, this black member, Ignacio Carria, he is the black guy in Vox, in the very far extreme right party in Spain from Vox. Well, I mean, do you think he's treated, he's discriminated against as anybody else? I mean, his mother comes, she is the heiress of cocoa fortune in Equatorial Guinea. His father is from a very wealthy Catalan family. He has the same nannies, the same schools as others. Does he see himself as a a black person, a regular black person? Not at all. So, for instance, if we have, for instance, here in Seville, people, Latin American women, who work here in Seville, and whenever they meet someone, they ask them, "Okay, well, where do you come from?" I mean, maybe they have been here for ages. So, I mean, Seville was the port to the Americas. We have a long history about this. So. Okay, have you ever walked through the Black Seville? Do you know who is the Black Count? Because there were many enslaved Black people who came here to Seville, because here they had rights, and they even had nobility titles, and we the last of the slaves who came from the Americas to Seville, she was emancipated here. She married an aristocrat, and well, they married people of the Roma community, so the history here is so long. So how can you ever ask someone here on the street, where do you come from? So these are, these constructs that, it's like an attributed racial categorization. So, so there is, I mean, there's no moral judgment. It apparently you want to actually sort of typecast people, say categorize people into certain boxes. Is what do we do about racialized? I mean, racialized. No, I don't like it. Nobody actually really likes it, but I mean, probably we'll have to change the differential, the definition. But everything here, everything related to this construct is related to the power systems, colonialism, inherited system. The history in there was my colleague Ana Brita Alves from Portugal. She is a Roma woman. She said a man, a Roma man in Portugal, he has a 43% likelihood of being shot by the police if he is also black. So a black Roma man in Portugal has currently 43% probability of being shot at by the law enforcement agencies. So we have and now Noah, for instance, she is from the Muslim community. The Muslim Islam gave us Granada, gave us Seville, gave us one of the wealthiest cultures in the world. We'd have to be thankful, but still we feel it is alien. Okay, Princess Maria Elena, she said she's from New York. Race is power. It's a power dynamics. So nobody wants to be called, labeled as racist. This is not very nice. We may have some prejudices, but but we don't. We keep it quiet. And I need to be very attentive so as not to impose my prejudices on anyone. So so this power dynamics lead us to speak about, our Western values. Well, these people do not have our same values, our same culture, Western values. Well, culture is a mechanism we have to differentiate us from animals. That's where we come from, where we descend from. So culture is usually a very flexible mechanism. It's not static, shouldn't be hegemonic. It should be adaptive. So for us to still survive. And this is why we are now entering the Anthropocene. That's what Maria Elena Jones mentioned about AI. Who is uh, who is designing and creating AI systems? Jim Borrowini, the doctor from Justice League in the US, when she spoke about the facial recognition systems and didn't recognize women, Black people's faces. And they need to wear white masks so they could be recognized on the screen. So this is how they learn. Now the AI systems will find out about your way of life and your friends in Facebook. Don't share on Facebook if you want to have any career perspectives, and don't share anything on Facebook. Do it everything in the analog world. Otherwise, I mean, you would not even be admitted or accepted for an interview if you don't go through the screen of an algorithm, because the algorithm has received the information that you have friends who, might be poor, might be, living, in an undesirable place. So, we said it's what do we want to achieve as a democracy? I speak a lot about this. I discussed this with Iñaki Vázquez de Rincón, a very good friend of mine. And he also always highlights how to protect minority rights and dissident rights. Dissidents need to be protected. We need to create discourses and situations inside our own communities, man, in many cases. Again, because we're facing many threats against individual freedoms, sexual freedom, etc. All this is actually endangering the way we live. Please, there are some never states there is a piece of work. There's is a work that you should be reading during the holidays. You will see how emotions are guiding us now. So because the race and racism, this is what has gathered us here. This is a construct, as I said. The white race, this is a construct. The white race doesn't really exist. And there's a Caucasian. So there is the history of white race that has been recently published, and hopefully it will be translated into Spanish shortly. Read it too. So democracy is in danger. What kind of life do we want for the future? Well, Fernando, this has been extremely interesting. I don't know whether you'd like to, speak about any of the issues raised by Fernando. Otherwise, I would like to conclude now, giving the floor to Maria Elena, John, because you've said many very interesting things. The culture, you said, Fernando, that this is a mechanism that differentiates us from animals. And to end on a positive note, not as negative as everything that we have discussed here. When we speak about culture, this is also synonymous to art and to the struggle against discrimination. Roma people, the Roma culture goes hand in hand with art as an expression of emancipation and the freedom, mostly for Roma women. Art has been a way of a mechanism for empowerment for Roma women, and I'm not only speaking about flamenco music. It's not only dance and music, but also or paintings, etc. And as Maria Elena Jones, she is a writer, she's an author, and I know that UN Women is focusing on the creative expression and the arts as part of its racial justice approach. So, as an artist, as an author, as a novelist, what do you think? What do you think is the connection between the arts and racial justice, and how have you implemented this and experienced this in your own life?
Thank you. I would like to be clear about how much time we have. to speak? Because as we get close to the end, it tends to get short. So
4 or 5 minutes, maybe in 4 or 5 minutes. Could you give us
yes,
a general idea?
sure. Thank you.
Over
So
three.
to answer, yes, thank you. To answer the question about a link between art and racial justice, I first would like to speak about harmful social norms and stereotypes, because that's the additional linking factor between those two things. Now, I'm speaking as a UN Women, representing UN Women, and so it's important for me to say that this is embedded in our own strategic plan. Specifically, we have an outcome that says we are mandated to change the harmful norms and stereotypes that drive injustices. In the case of UN Women, gender stereotypes, gender norms tends to be primary, but we are also, as we've been talking about, looking more intersectionally on gender and other factors. So that's kind of the big link there. Further, the relationship between dismantling systemic racism through positive social norms is a direct one, as is described in the 2021 Human Rights Council conference paper. And special mention is given there to the importance of dismantling one of the chief drivers of the structures that show up systemic racism, and that is the racial stereotypes and false characterizations that are embedded in social norms. In other words, harmful racial stereotypes are foundational to the norms that perpetuate racial injustice. And I can keep talking about how different reports describe this, particularly in terms of women and girls of African descent, where we are focusing right now because of patterns of negative stereotyping that underlie exclusion, marginalization, violence, and other human rights violations. UNESCO is the organization within the UN that has really been leading on the role of culture and arts in development and human rights. And we have agreed to jointly go forward with UNESCO with work that we are calling Artivism Unleashed, the blending of art and activism. And in Brazil, our country office there has already begun discussions on what such a partnership would look like in the Amazon in the context of the environment and race and gender. So this is happening. It is starting. Sometimes it will seem very strange when I enter a space as a UN representative and start talking about art. But I hope as we go along, and those on this panel, I think, are already aware of the power of art. And I would like to quote from one of the main global organizations that still heavily provides funds to artists working on social justice. And the quote is that any effort to seek social justice must reckon with the underlying causes and impacts of inequality, which often means confronting foundational beliefs of communities. Artists are able to translate the intellectual understanding of injustice into emotional spheres of consciousness and imagination, guiding us to imagine new realities and creating new understandings of community by seeing reflections of self in what had previously been inaccessible and recognizing all that connects us across lands, languages, religions, and races. And so I feel like I may just want to stop here. There's so much more, but I think it's very basic in that. And when you ask me about, had I seen that in my own work, I wrote quite a while ago a novel that was grounded in historical research. In the end, it was about the African diaspora experience, and it was centered on a former community of enslaved people who had escaped and survived hidden for until modern times. I worked with a young woman, a young white woman from Alabama, whose grandmother, my colleague came to a book event and bought about a dozen copies requested by her grandmother in Alabama. And I knew that this young colleague was an outlier in that her family was a conservative white family grown in, developed in, grown and raised in the South, and coming with those embedded prejudices. She had managed to kind of escape and was in the racial justice, human rights arena. And I said, your grandmother wanted, a dozen copies of this book. Why? Like, what is she going to do with them? And she said, well, it wasn't close to Christmas. She said she's going to put them up to give her Christmas gifts to her friends, that people of her same age. And I said, but what could she possibly find in common with this book? How could it speak to her? And she said, well, that's why, because it found a way to speak to her. And now she wants to share that with the people she knows who were never able to get beyond the barriers that they grew up with. And so firsthand, I have experienced in that and many other ways, the transformative power. Also in my reading, as a child, the reality, the new realities that I came to from a small island in the Caribbean, 108 square miles, 50,000 people. I was able to enter the world of people that I thought at the time I would never be able to know or understand. So I would say that this is the framework in which I have really, I've dug into this area of work in UN Women and hope to really give it as much weight as I can put behind it. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, Marilena. Interesante.
Well, thank you so much, Marilena. This has been extremely interesting, and we will, in this unleashed activism, really, we will be very attentive to that. And it's so interesting to see how art and gender together, hand in hand, can transform our society. Can we have 5 minutes for Q&A, maybe? If there's any question or comment from the audience. With a microphone, please. Well, good morning, good afternoon, and thank you very much for all the ideas that you've been sharing. I found them extremely interesting myself. I think there are many points in common between the experience of the Muslim women experience, Roma women experience. And one of the things that you really see a lot is the way, mostly for the Hijadi Muslim women, well, they are considered as children. They are infantilized. They are considered as they are a bit, retarded even. And one said that you are like a feminist. I mean, and another feminist, well, consider that you are feminist, but you're flawed, right? You are defective feminists, and you would need to first become full feminist and become fully recovered, and then you would be able to be a complete feminist. Okay, minorities, well, we're considered as if we live in a sort of a spatio-temporal bubble where things happen in quite a different way, that we have sort of a chip in our brain, implanted in our brain, and this makes us live in a different space and time than the rest of the people on the planet. Well, apparently there's this dystopian view of the world where we minorities live has done a lot of harm, right? Well, okay, you're right. Race doesn't exist, but racism does. And yes, there is no race, but there are people who have a certain political and economic status, and are mostly racialized. I mean, of course, we might not like the term, but we don't have a better one so far. So how do we define identities? How do we define definitions? Have their advantages and and also have many dangers, mostly when we tend to extrapolate and exaggerate. We as minorities, we also have our own weaknesses there. Um, we shouldn't be making us the exotic people that the white people want us to see. Otherwise we will become a cartoon of what we are. But just some comments from my side, and thank you to colleagues for the discourse. You've really been very harsh. The femo nationalism, I think it's a very interesting concept, and thank you all very much for your words. One last question, because they would like to make one last question, and then we will hear the final comments. Well, good afternoon. It's not really a question. It's just something I'd like to share with all of you. It is always a pleasure to listen to Fernando. And when you were asking about challenges that Muslim women have had to face, I'd like to add that for Black women and Black men as well, we still have a challenge ahead of us to we need more empowerment for migrants, Black men and women, migrant men and women. And it is essential to have events such as this, to have a space such as this where we all can take part, and for young Black men and women to be involved and engaged. And let me read my notes. Yes, and to try and change the terms, the perception and the association of all Black being dangerous, to be of lesser quality, to be a threat. So these spaces should be more visible, for more people to be involved, for associations to participate, to have a much greater outreach to and to include all these NGOs that work every day with these migrants. Thank you very much, and thank you for organizing this. If I may, just one minute, just one more minute, please, just for one last comment that, from Noah and Fernando. No, I just like to share something with you about this infantilization for Muslim women. Well, it happens to me. I'm visibly a Muslim woman. I'm a doctor, but it's incredible, unbelievable, the number of times I'm asked, if you are a Muslim woman, I mean, but you are a college student, you're a university student, you're a doctor, why do you wear that? It's a sort of, it's unbelievable that I get asked about my scarf still. And it's even though we try to project a different image, but unfortunately, it's a very uphill battle. That's that. It's only that's the only thing I wanted to add. I believe, says Fernando, that that we all have in mind, the homework that we need to take with us from here is we should be self-questioning. I mean, we should be questioning ourselves on a day-to-day ourselves. I mean, we need to remember that, we tend to be stubborn as if we were children trying to learn something from the beginning. Concepts vary, definitions need to be adaptive and to be flexible, but it is for us to point the way. Okay, well, okay, but you need to be really, you need to do it and to be resilient. Okay, you want to have your degree, then you need to study and study, and that's the only thing. I mean, never giving up. That's what I recommend to everyone. Just one last thing. Thank you all. Thank you. Thanks to all panelists. I believe that this has been so important. Maria Elena, Maria, Rosario, Noah, Fernando. Well, Rosario, thank you very much. You've been as flexible as all. Andalusians are very quite famous for the different, because of the different concept of time and elasticity of time that we have, and you've honored that very well. But we need to be really closing now because the next roundtable is around the corner. I'd just like to mention one thing. I would have loved to have a much longer debate here. I mean, it's really impossible because of the time constraints. But when you are a woman and when you are not only a woman, but you are racialized, so you have you're racially diverse or divergent, but things become far more complicated. We need points of reference. We need people like Maria, like the U.S. ambassador this morning, like many activists everywhere, regardless of the origin and ethnicity. We all need to break around glass ceilings. Otherwise, the girls that will follow would not have these benchmarks or these points of reference to try and see themselves as grown-ups later on. So it's not only for ourselves. We have a very long way to go, but we need the purpose here is to actually show the whole of society that this diversity is here. It is alive. Some people ask us that where, I mean, we said, okay, women, I mean, there are diverse, racialized women everywhere. Why aren't they present in the centers of power? Why should we still be having to call for people to be there, for women, diverse women, to be in the center of power, in the decision-making positions? Why? But when we are already a part of society, this is why we need to create fora to discuss gender and intersectionality. I mean, even if we won't call it that way in the future, but it's men and women. We should be discussing this. Of course, men are also affected by racism, but for women, it is a double attack. We have to fight against racism and against the patriarchy, because the patriarchy is not only racist, but it also has a gender bias. So thank you very much. You've warmed my heart. And now with that, we are wrapping up. Thank you very much.